Hi, everyone. Vanessa Rufus here with WCNC Charlotte. Thank you so much for joining this town hall today. As we've been previewing on air and online, just letting folks know leading up to this town hall, we're going to be talking about National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month. This is a really important topic that a lot of folks in our community are grappling with right now. We've talked about the impacts of mental health issues on our young people, on our veterans. So we are hoping to start the dialogue today, maybe get some great resources out there, answer some questions for folks. And we've got some very knowledgeable panelists who will be joining us this afternoon to talk about this. You know, we've witnessed a record spike really in suicide deaths last year. We had more than 49,000 people take their own lives in 2022, and that is an increase of nearly 3% from 2021. So we know that any death by suicide is too many, one too many. So we want to talk about just awareness of this issue and what folks can do to either help themselves or help loved ones in their circle who might be dealing with these struggles. So we do want to go ahead and bring in our panelists here with us today. If that's possible. We've got folks standing by. We've got two people. We have Lisa DeShantis, who is a crisis services team lead with North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And we also have Matt Simon, who is a licensed family therapist with New Hope Treatment Center. So I do want to thank both of you for joining us today. And just a reminder for folks, once again, who are watching at home, we have folks tuning in on WCNC Plus. We have folks who are on the YouTube channel for WCNC Charlotte. We have folks who are joining us on social media as well. So please, anyone who is watching at home, feel free to ask questions. We have the experts here to help you, and we will get to your questions as soon as we can. But we want to actually just start here with some of the main questions that we've been getting from folks leading up to this, and really just wanting to talk about maybe the warning signs, things that people should be looking out for in their loved ones. It feels like it could be a tricky situation to maybe try to discern comments that a loved one might be making. You know, at what point do I need to start to be concerned? So Matt or Lisa, whoever feels comfortable jumping in first, let's talk about warning signs.
It's been good.
So, hi, thanks for having me. So yeah, we want to be able to help people in really recognizing that. And one thing is that there is never just one warning sign, usually when someone is thinking about suicide or experiencing a behavioral health crisis. There may be a history of depression or mental illness, though, with that person. There might be a recent crisis that they have experienced, and that could be personal, that could be work related, that could be family, friends, social. A person can be isolating socially. Previous attempts at suicide can be a warning sign also if someone has had a previous attempt. Substance misuse is another common one, and interpersonal or family difficulties or conflicts can definitely be a warning sign. Matt, did you want to add to that at all?
No, yeah, I think that's great. And I want to say thank you as well. And thanks for everybody who's tuning into this really important topic. So yeah, Lisa, I think you got it. I mean, it's such an individualized thing. Obviously, there are some trends and things to look for. What I would tell folks is if you have a loved one that you're even have an inkling of concern about, is to not ignore that. Don't minimize it. I think that's honestly what I would caution against. I think sometimes we're really quick to believe that, well, that could never happen to my aunt or my sister or my brother or my child. That thing happens to other people and they're just going through a phase and they'll bounce. Some of those things might be true, but I would just urge folks right now to not take that for granted and not take things lightly. And if you have a concern, to really, really lean into those people. I think if anybody is dealing with suicidal thoughts and feeling that level of hopelessness, that isolation is one of the overriding feelings that they're feeling. And even if part of their brain kind of wants to stay isolated, a huge part of them, I think, is really craving connection. So yeah, there's so many warning signs. It's hard to go through all of them. And so, my warning signs might look different than Lisa's warning signs, but people who love people and who are concerned about people typically have a gut feeling if something's off. And then sometimes we override that and minimize it and go on with our day. And that's what I would caution people not to do.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, not wanting to minimize things, because we have done countless reports over, recent months and of course recent years, particularly with the pandemic kind of bringing to light and maybe even exacerbating some mental health concerns for folks. But, one report actually that was fairly recent that sticks out in my mind is a mother who worked from home who didn't even know that her daughter had tried to take her own life. I believe it was actually twice. And she's in that home, with her child, and had no idea that this was going on and that her child was struggling. And I guess, if we could turn the spotlight now to talk about young people, and we know that suicide is one of the leading causes of death for young people. Within 2021, we saw it being the second leading cause of death for those the ages of 10 to 14. And how do you even start that conversation? It just feels like such a heavy topic to maybe try to broach with a child. Do you have any advice for how parents can start a dialogue with their kids, just to kind of check in and see how they're doing?
Yeah, I can try. And again, and Vanessa, I appreciate you calling us experts, but I think Lisa and I would probably both acknowledge we're also just people and parents trying to navigate our ways through really tough situations too. I think it's not always a perfect way to do things. There's probably a lot of wrong ways to do it, but not always a perfect way. What I would say is to be direct. I'd encourage parents to be really, really direct. Again, I think sometimes you so badly do not want your kid to be struggling at that level, that it's easy to beat around the bush and to even ask leading questions to say, hey, you doing okay? If you say you're doing okay, that sounds like you want them to answer yes and then move on with your day and move on with your life. And that might give you kind of a false sense of security, instead of actually saying, I'm really, really concerned about you. I've noticed you being in your room more. Are you having any thoughts of hurting yourself? Are you having any thoughts of suicide? I think it's really hard actually just to say the word, but it has power, and it could be an invitation for a young person to actually kind of unburden themselves. When again, actually, that story highlights a lot of kids and a lot of people suffer in silence, and they actually don't want to be a burden on their loved ones. And so these attempts are not something that are usually kind of big public displays. So I would encourage folks to be really, really direct without being, punitive or coming across as you're angry or mad or disappointed. But you do have to be, I would encourage folks to be direct and to actually use the word suicide or suicidal thoughts or something in that ballpark, as opposed to just kind of a vague check-in, because you could miss the mark with that.
I have to agree. Absolutely, Matt, when you say that, you have to be direct when talking to your kids. And I would encourage that, talk to other parents, talk to school counselors about having those conversations as well, if you don't know how to have those conversations, because there is support out there for parents as well to be able to have those conversations, use those words, and make sure that you're really addressing what needs to be addressed.
Yeah, that jumped out to me too, Lisa. Vanessa, the story that you were just saying, I think it's so important again as parents, and it's not easy, especially for parents of adolescents, but obviously at some level they're being raised by a village of people who aren't you, and there's some developmental norms there. There's certainly a time in my life where I was more apt to talk to some of my youth workers or coaches or something like that faster than I would ever share something with my parents. And that's not because they necessarily did anything. That was the stage of life I was at. So there were other adults in my life that potentially were going to be more dialed in to my day-to-day feelings than my parents were. But my parents usually knew who those people were. So they kind of knew who my circle was and my circle of adult influence. And if you're a parent out there raising a kid, you got to know the other adults who are in and around your kid's life. That could make a world of difference.
I guess I'm just wondering, in doing these stories and in talking about this really important topic, I feel like a lot of folks might have the question of why, like, why are we seeing so much more highlighting of mental health concerns and unfortunately, suicide. And I just go back to, and I'm sure there's not one particular answer, right? But, social media. And I just think about kids these days growing up with that really heavy element that's a big part of their lives. Not a lot of us grew up with that as like a constant, steady influence in our lives. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, maybe just like why we're seeing this right now.
Yeah, Lisa, I'll jump in for a second, then you can clean me up anything I get wrong, and I could probably do a 5-hour town hall about the damages of social media on young people. But I do, it's not been around long, but it has been around long enough for some pretty solid research to show, particularly its negative impact on young girls and their rates of anxiety and depression. It's incredibly damaging. Now it's a reality we have to figure out. It's not going away. So we do have to figure out a way to navigate it, but it is having an absolutely detrimental impact on young people's mental health, particularly young women's mental health.
Absolutely. And I think as parents and trying to navigate that with your kids and knowing what they're doing online is really important, and what they're connecting, who they're connecting with, because social media and phones and that connection to so many people, there's not only there is definitely some good out there. There's some positive influence out there as well, but there is a lot of negative too, and a lot of that is held inside, and there's that lack, sometimes of communication and talking with people and talking what they just saw online out. When I think about it, as when we used to watch TV or watch shows, it was all in front of everybody. It was in the living room. It was with everybody. And now there's just that isolation that you can also see with just the social media, and not having that outlet sometimes to have those conversations about what they just saw, what they just experienced on social media or online.
Is that to say that maybe it is worth doing more regular check-ins, just having general conversations with your kids about, what are you seeing online and how does that make you feel? Is it worth, for some folks, and I know, kind of the genie's out of the bottle with some kids, but maybe I know some parents, for example, who have delayed as long as possible getting that smartphone for their kid and getting them access. Like they just push it as long as they can go before letting their kids loose online. I guess, what sort of recommendations do you have for parents trying to navigate social media? I know it's hard, there are positives to social media too. I know you mentioned that, Lisa, but how do you kind of mitigate the negative stuff in the best way?
Yeah, I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old, 8-year-old and 5-year-old daughters, and my 5-year-old asked, when is my 8-year-old going to get her first phone? And I said, I think like 2045, maybe like when she's 40. But yeah, and because I honestly, because some of it, I don't. It's really hard. I mean, I would say just because something's hard doesn't mean you can't try. You don't try, and you have to try. So you do have to try to monitor. You do have to put, I think, some boundaries. And again, that's the case for any parent raising any young person in any time, right? Around anything, is like we have to put up some boundaries. We have to understand that there's going to be resistance to those boundaries. We have to understand that there's going to be resistance if you're not the cool parent who is permitting everything under the sun. But I would not encourage folks to be the cool parent when it comes to unbridled social media access. I think what's challenging now is it's more likely than ever, or more able than ever for a kid to be your kid to be having a completely different parallel life than what you are aware of. Completely different persona, completely different groups of friends and peers and influences and information. The ability to control what's coming into your kid's brain and heart on a day-to-day basis is just harder than ever. So yeah, you do have to try. I do think it starts foundationally with the relationship you have with your child, the level of transparency, the level of openness. If you encourage your child to be open, and then the first time that they're open, you snap at them or you come down hard on them or you judge them, that is informing, you just told them actually that you don't want them to be open with you. So again, there's some, I don't know if there's a perfect playbook out there yet because this is all so new on the landscape, but trying to have an open, trusting, non-judgmental relationship. And then again, trying to understand that we all, in different ways, we didn't have social media, but we all had some behaviors and some lives and some dynamics and some relationships that we didn't want our parents to know about growing up. So there's also some of this falls within the range of just normal adolescent. But again, being so dialed in that you can tell the difference, or again, really just monitoring, is my child's mood and behavior changing? Are they starting to regress in school? The thing that they love doing, are they all of a sudden have they stopped doing that? That can be signs, again, that we're not dealing just with normal teenage angst, but we're actually dealing with something that's getting into dangerous territory.
Lisa, any thoughts you wanted to add?
I agree. I think, it is a whole, there is no playbook on this, right? We're all navigating this, but again, I agree with everything that Matt said.
I'm wondering, I mean, as mental health professionals, are you noticing more families reaching out for help than before? And if so, I guess, what is your take on that? Because I know more people reaching out might not necessarily mean more mental health crises than we were dealing with before, but maybe just more people feeling comfortable reaching out for help.
So I'd like to take that, and I'll bring that back to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline here in North Carolina. And I want to highlight just that about 10% of the calls that actually come into the call center are on behalf of somebody else. So that is calling for a family member, calling because they're facing some kind of, friend or family or even, a coworker, colleague, that they're noticing that, how do I get this person some help because I see something different happening. I think that highlights that we are seeing people that are reaching out on behalf of others.
Yeah, and I think Vanessa, you're kind of what we've noticed at New Hope and other organizations I've been a part of, especially since COVID, is conversation around mental health seems to have been normalized nationally more than it ever had been before. Conversation even around things like trauma, childhood trauma. That's all good stuff. I think that's really, really good stuff. So we're normalizing. So I think there are probably folks who suffered in silence who are now more apt to speak. And then I do think there was truly some detrimental, some harm that happened over the last few years of isolation and fear and anxiety and all things COVID related, particularly on young people, that did have an actual impact on that generation that went through it. And then you add in the social media. So I think, yes, there is probably some things that are worse today than they were. And then there's also awareness. So it's kind of two-pronged. So to answer the short answer is yes, we are getting more calls than ever before. It can feel like there's more mental health need than ever before. The optimist part of me, though, says there's more resources than there's ever been. There's more dialogue. There's more training. There's more access to care than there's ever been. So we can couple those things together. So if folks want help, I truly believe if folks want help, if you reach out for it and you're persistent and you get plugged into the right organization, or to Lisa's point, you put some call, 988 is a really new thing in our country. It's a great new resource, and that came from recognition that mental health is a real thing and it needs to be dealt with differently than other types of crises. And that's awesome stuff at the end of the day. That's going to be really good for us.
Speaking of resources and 988, obviously we've talked about that. We've alluded to how you can call, you can text, and you can get help either for yourself or for a loved one in a crisis. But I guess I'm wondering, as far as preventative stuff, I mean, what would you recommend folks do before we get to the point where we're calling 988 and we need help right now?
Yeah, go ahead, Lisa.
So I say have the conversations. Again, it all goes back to those conversations. And if you notice that something is, off a little bit, if there are some signs, some of those awareness, some of those, things that we talked about in the beginning about you're noticing changes. then you're really looking at, talk to somebody, talk to a primary care doctor, talk to anyone. There are resources out there in every community. There are also, some of those other prevention things that, are being done across the state are by our sister agency, Division of Public Health. They're working a lot on making sure that there's awareness out there on making sure that you're locking up firearms, that you're making sure that drugs are out of like narcotics or prescription medications are not easily accessible. So these are things that we can do as prevention. It's also, there's a lot of community trainings out there that are, out for the public. There's mental health first aid that anyone can take and really start to understand what those signs and symptoms are. And those are usually offered in every community, and they're usually free of charge, to really help everyone understand, so that when somebody is facing that, they know how to get the help in the resources in their communities.
Yeah, those are fantastic specific resources. The kind of broad statement I would maybe make is just, I think you treat mental health like any other type of health. And the earlier you can get support for challenges at the lowest possible level, the better chance of success. So there are counselors out there that are trained to work with youth as young as 3, 4, 5 years old. There's models of counseling that work for youth as that young. Like anything, like in health, if I have a heart issue and I let that go untreated for 15 years, the likelihood that that's going to need to be treated in an ER is really, really high. And my chances of success is much lower than if I did more preventative maintenance. So that goes for individuals, that goes for couples doing preventative work. We're just, we're not great at that at human beings. We're really good at rallying when something's really about to break. But we're not so great at doing the investments in the small things. So yeah, I think again, for parents, I focus a lot on parents and kids, just at the earliest signs of challenges, get them to see a counselor, and not just them to see a counselor, have the family go see a counselor, try to open some lines of dialogue. You're not committing for your whole life. You're not saying that me and my family are going to be in counseling forever. But maybe just during that chapter, that might be the most important thing that you did. And you'd rather do it now I promise you'd rather do it then than 10 years later.
So true. Yeah, I guess, and we've mentioned the pandemic a few times now, how that has likely added to maybe what has been existing for some folks, or brought to light maybe something that people didn't know that they could feel or deal with. Do you think it's normal for folks, even as, we're getting pretty removed from the pandemic at this point, the lockdowns and the isolations, et cetera. Do you think it's normal for folks to still feel not quite right, even after, we've gone months at this point, years really, since we've had to deal with like some of the heavy stuff of lockdown and isolation?
I would say absolutely. Everybody handled that, and it was trauma for some people. It was definitely a trauma to be all of a sudden a very social person and be told that you have to stay home, or youth that, I can't go see my friends. I can't go play with them. I can't have a birthday party. I can't, all of those things that, and really we were told to be afraid and not stand next to people and not do that. So especially for our youth that were, they were told those things. There definitely can be that that can continue. Not only that, but I don't know, occasionally, you hear somebody coughing a lot and you're like, ooh, I better back up. Those are not things that I think that a lot of people really thought of before the pandemic. So especially when we talk about this with our kids and our young adults now that are trying to navigate that and trying to regain those social years, especially, when they missed so much of that, and now say, oh, it's okay, go back and do it all again. it's a weird dynamic to put them in.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think the impact usually lags behind, and sometimes it can lag behind 12 to 18 months. Yeah, somebody lost somebody during the pandemic and wasn't able to go be at their hospital bed. There's just a lot of stuff. And then people who actually lost, people to COVID and just, who passed away because of that. So there's just a lot there. I think it impacted our social fabric a little bit. I think it impacted our communities a little bit. I think just the tension kind of ratcheted it up across a lot of communities. So, yeah, and again, like to Lisa's point, I think some people were able to just like flip it off like a switch and kind of go back to normal and just, hey, that was a weird thing. Let's just move on. But I think for some folks, it is completely normal for, I think Lisa pointing out, there's kind of a trauma response. And a lot of times the symptoms of trauma lag behind the actual traumatic event itself, which is why sometimes people have a hard time, putting those things together. So, my child's kind of depression and isolation, the fact that might be related to something he experienced 18 months ago is hard to connect, but it can be for sure.
I think that's important for folks to know. Yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
We've been talking a lot about children and young people and how, they're dealing with this. And this is a particularly important group to talk about. But I feel like another important group is veterans. We know, according to the VA, that an average of 16 to 17 veterans died by suicide every day in 2020. And, this is a group that needs the resources. I don't know if you are able to speak on that, maybe just some of the trauma that our veterans deal with and the resources that they need when they come home or, try to reintegrate into civilian life.
Yeah, Lisa, I'd love to hear in terms of state.
Yeah. So again, yes, veterans in North Carolina, definitely, we have a lot of veterans here. We have not only the Veterans Crisis Line that is available to individuals that want to reach out. There is lots of resources and community support usually around that, but it's getting people into there, right? Again, like Matt just mentioned, trauma is not immediate. Sometimes it's a little bit longer of a process, and it's not just when somebody comes home from being in the military that they need that support. That's ongoing for long periods of time. Our veterans work is very robust, and I think that there still needs to be more because we have more and more individuals that are needing that support in the community. Again, trying to make sure that we're treating it right at we have resources available when someone is starting to experience symptoms rather than letting it get to a crisis situation.
Yeah. I think I think the state of North Carolina, like Lisa said, actually does have a lot of resources. It can be frustrating, I think, at times to try to navigate the systems. So I just encourage folks, don't give up, keep calling. I promise there's really, really good case managers and care managers out there that want to help. And again, I think the way we talk about these issues is important, particularly for like the veterans community. That is, this is not a weakness. This is not something that makes you weak. And again, I think the way that we sometimes view PTSD as, as a debilitating thing, it is a really serious thing, but it's also something that if you're living with and you're navigating, that just shows how strong you are, shows how resilient you are. So I think some of the language that we use around this is really important because although I think we move the needle a little bit, probably around mental health stigma within our military community, there's still a lot of room to go. I think there's a lot of folks who don't want to admit just how traumatic their experience was, which I think just by nature, the whole thing is traumatic. It doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it doesn't make it less honorable. It's unbelievably honorable that you would willingly sign up for something that is basically almost by default a traumatic experience. So we should be inclined to really try to take care of everybody and almost assume trauma as opposed to waiting for the symptoms to show up. I think we need to assume that this was likely a traumatic experience and register at some level on the head or on the heart in a way that we need to care for. But again, not pathologize and not make somebody feel strange or weird or weak or less of a soldier. That's not the case at all.
I'm wondering if there are things that folks at home could do to help. Many of us watching are not mental health professionals, but when you hear about kids who are in mental anguish, you hear about veterans who are in mental anguish. I mean, is there anything that the everyday person can do to help with that?
Sure. Yeah, I can. Oh, go ahead, Lisa.
No, please go, Matt, please.
I mean, I think the answer is yes, Vanessa, and I'll try to keep this in. I'll try to keep it short. But yeah, I think the average, because I think we're mental health professionals, but we're just normal people too, living our lives and go to the grocery store and trying to raise kids and trying to go to jobs and do all those things. So I think, again, the way that this is going to be hokey maybe, but again, I think it starts and ends with how we treat each other as people, as neighbors, as citizens, as communities. That's a big part, I think, of what we've lost. I think that's a big reason why some of the mental health stuff has been exacerbated. Is I just don't think we talk to each other like we used to. I don't think we care for each other the way we used to. I don't think we look out for each other the way we used to. When I grew up as a kid, and this makes me sound like the old man, but it's like, I think my neighbors, they looked out for me just as much as my parents did. They monitored what was going on. They kind of knew what was going on. There was just more of a communal sense. And now I think people go into their homes and they stare at their iPhones and they binge Netflix, which is all good. I stare at my iPhone, I binge Netflix too, but we have to get out and we have to keep connecting with each other. I think so much of this mental health crisis is really a crisis of a lack of connection and a lack of relationships and a lack of meaningful relationships. And I think whether you're a mental health professional or not, that we all crave that as human beings. And I think no amount of technology is going to supplement that. So I think we all just need to keep on doing the best we can in our individual lives. So that's my kind of hokey answer, but I think that's true. If people actually want to really just involve themselves in the mental health space, I think plugging into organizations like NAMI is a really great way to do things. There's phenomenal local chapters and state chapters of NAMI basically everywhere that have awesome awareness campaigns, places you can give money and time and volunteer. So that's a way to directly connect if mental health is something that really draws people.
Absolutely. And I would also add to that, and I know I mentioned it just briefly, but mental health first aid. A lot of us are CPR, first aid trained. Well, you know what? There's a mental health first aid course out there that really just, it gives you the resources to understand. It gives the education on basic mental health and substance use disorders. And it can be, many of us, I should say, not all, but many of us have to do like a first aid or a CPR training. Well, it's important to get that mental health first aid training as well.
That's a great point. Yep, great point.
And there's a youth specific one and a regular one.
That's so great to know. I mean, I had no idea. I mean, personally, I had no idea that there was something like that out there. So I think folks would be interested to learn that and hopefully maybe take part in one of these courses. We've talked about 988 and how that's obviously pretty new, relatively new. That's something that really came as policymakers really got behind something that they thought would be beneficial to the public. We know that some lawmakers are looking into something called a suicide safety plan. And I didn't know if either of you or both of you could talk about what a suicide safety plan is and how that would work for folks.
So a suicide safety plan is really just thinking about, when someone is not in crisis, that's the time that you make a safety plan. So when you're really thinking about, when things don't look good for me, what does that look like? What happens when I'm in a crisis, or what are some things that might be different? And really looking also at not only that, but what are some things that have helped me in the past. If someone has experienced behavioral health or substance use crisis in the past, or that's something that they can work on and understand what helped them, and really have a plan in place before a crisis goes into play, before someone ends up in crisis, to help alleviate that, maybe, lack of a better term, like, get somebody into the help or the treatment or the services or the supports that they need faster, rather than letting it continue to escalate. And it's really about getting that person's buy-in, and that person is really making their own plan for when they're unable to make a plan.
Wow. Okay. So it's almost like a self-made plan that maybe a person would clue loved ones into. This is
Right.
what I want you to do for me if
Right.
you start to notice X, Y, Z.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah. What makes me feel better isn't necessarily what makes Lisa feel better. How somebody should approach me on my worst day isn't the same as how somebody should approach Lisa on their first day. So the kids we serve in one of my programs is every kid has a safety plan that's individualized to them, that basically says, hey, these are the 3 things that you don't do when I'm in a bad way, and these are the 3 things that you should do when I'm in a bad way. And that's different for every kid, and usually their success hinges on their own self-awareness of those things, and then the people around them, their ability to kind of navigate that. So yeah, it's a great thing, and I've not heard about the legislation piece around that, but if there's some way to, again, keep trying to scale that or normalize that, or that sounds like nothing but a good thing.
As we kind of get towards the tail end here of this town hall, I wanted to see if I could ask both of you if there's anything specific that you were hoping to talk about, or just something that initially came to mind when we came to you and said, hey, let's have this town hall and suicide prevention month. Is there anything that you were like, I really wish that we could have the opportunity to say this? And I'll let whoever wants to go first take that.
Lisa, I defer to you. Go for it.
So, again, I think it all comes back to is we can't be afraid to ask the questions. We need to start talking about this more. I really thank you for having this and really talking about this, because I really, I was just, I was happy to be a part of this. I was excited to be able to talk about this. My kids know that I talk about prevention pretty much all the time. My family knows about that. Like that's what I do. I'm here into any forum that I can have to talk about resources that are out there and supports for people. I'm really just glad to get the word out and spread the word. And I think the biggest thing is that we want everybody to know that there is always someone there to talk to. If you're having a bad day, if things are not going right, there is always someone there to talk to. And that, we always have someone that can respond if you need somebody out in the community, that there are places that people can go. So you're never alone. And I think that's the biggest message that we want to just get out there, is that there are supports and there is help out there.
Yeah, I love that. I don't think I can make that much better, but I'll just reiterate again, North Carolina has a ton of resources. I actually just got back from a trip down to Texas, and I think North Carolina is a resource-rich state when it comes to mental health. We can always do better, but there are thousands of extremely talented therapists and mental health workers, and I promise there's a therapist out there for you. And therapy is not an exact science. I'm a therapist myself, and it's not an exact science. It's more of an art than anything else, and it's really about that connection and that relationship. So you might not get it right the first time. It might not be the right fit the first time, but I promise there is a helping professional out there that was put on this earth to help you through your thing. And we all have a thing, and we all have chapters of our life where we need that person. So again, the reason I wanted to be a part of this is just because I think anytime we can be normalizing that life is a roller coaster, and there's all times where we're just holding on for dear life, and it's okay, and it's normal to go through times of hopelessness, and it's hard to see light at the end of the tunnel, that again, there is light. Life is worth living. You are meant to be here. So anybody out there who is struggling, please reach out. Again, the 988 thing, I'm hoping in 10 years when my girls are becoming adults, that's just a normal part of their, daily existence, and they know that they've got this lifeline anytime they need it, but it's existing now. So please use it if you need it.
Wonderful. Well, I think that we've tackled a lot of great questions here, and hopefully given some folks some good resources and some hope too, right? Because like both of you said, it can sometimes feel hopeless for folks, like maybe this is never going to end and this is just how they're going to feel forever. And obviously, as both of you have reiterated, that is simply not true. There's help for folks out there, and there's someone waiting, as you mentioned, Matt, to connect you to the help and the resources that you need, a good fit for folks looking for, a guiding hand here. So we'll just once again let folks know 988. That's a great resource. Call or text if you do feel like you are in a crisis and you need the help. Reach out to a loved one, reach out to a mental health professional. Please don't suffer in silence. We want to thank Lisa DeShantis once again with North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services, and Matt Simon with New Hope Treatment Centers for joining us. And we do thank you for joining us at home or wherever you are joining us from on WCNC Plus, the YouTube channel, and on social media. Continue the dialogue at home, folks, and we hope that you are well and have a wonderful rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.